Good morning. Welcome to Pot Up with Matthews in the Morning from the Crime Prevention Security System Studios. Large enough to serve you, small enough to care. Got a great show today. It was a great weekend. We actually had some type of sports to watch. We got Johnny Cornell. Johnny,
yeah, man.
What's happening, my man? How are you?
Shay, it's good to be back with you guys. I miss you guys. I'm looking forward to when the world gets normal again and everybody is back in the sports world doing the things that we watch and want them to do. And I'm doing well. How are you doing?
Doing great, man. It was a great weekend because I don't know if I've ever watched that much of the NFL draft in my life. But there was nothing else to watch. I thought it was outstanding from the point of I honestly, I hope they do the draft like that from now on. And the reason, JC, is I know they won't because of money. But, it was so great to see the cameras in all the living rooms of the kids that were being selected, to see how their family members reacted, how they reacted, instead of watching them walk across the stage and hug Roger Goodell.
Oh,
I could care less about it.
100%. That was the biggest thing I took from it, QB. It was the fact that we got to see the human side of these players. And was that Jackie's story? We got to see the human side of these players, and we got to see things that you typically wouldn't see, which is what you just said. And I certainly enjoy seeing emotions, and I like seeing how different so many of these guys reacted, where Van Jefferson jumps around the room and goes crazy, and then Isaiah, not Simmons, but the lineman for Georgia, he sat there and his mom threw popcorn on him, and he just couldn't believe it. He put his hat over his head. His mom, his girlfriend got all over him, and his mom moved her away so she could get in the camera. And I just thought it was really cool seeing how where they lit, the living rooms. I was even interested in what kind of living room they were sitting in, because I wanted to see how big or small they were, how many people could cram into a room and watch the draft. And I was like you, I watched just about as much as humanly possible. I even watched Saturday's 4th through 7th round QB, and I really was impressed by the Southeastern Conference, and it's amazing to me how so many players came out of this league, with the exception of Mississippi, Ole Miss. But LSU and Alabama alone had 19 more picks in the first 3 rounds than the entire ACC conference, the Atlantic Coast Conference, which only had 8. And I was just really amazed at how 10 of the top 20 picks played in the SEC QB. I mean, doesn't it show where all the talent is, obviously?
Yeah, I mean, there's no question about it. Before we get into that, the one negative about the draft, in my opinion, was I have no idea why the producers or whoever's in charge of the graphics whenever a kid was selected, they always had some tragedy or some negativity. Mom died of breast cancer. Mom went through drug rehab. Younger brother was struck by lightning. Nobody cares about any of that stuff. So hopefully they'll do away with that. But yes, 64 guys from the SEC were drafted. Many other ones after the draft signed as free agents. But LSU with 14 picks, they were just loaded this year. I thought it was really interesting too, in the state of Florida. Obviously, the schools in the state, Florida had the most at 7 kids selected. Miami had 4. FIU had 2. UCF, FAU, and FSU only had 1 player selected. University of South Florida had nobody selected. And I told, our good buddy Kerwin Bell, who coached there for 1 year, told me the talent was not very good when he took over. And I'd be danged if he wasn't kidding when they don't have 1 player selected.
Well, their record certainly showed that. But, getting back to what you just mentioned as far as the human tragedy aspect of some of what these players have gone through, I agree with you. That was really not the thing I was looking forward to hearing about as related to a certain player. But I think the point that ESPN was trying to make with some of these guys was how they overcame adversity and how they had to live through so much adversity as they were growing up. There was one story about a kid who was basically living homeless for the most of his, earlier life, and was picked up by his coach and kind of raised through his formative years by his coach. And okay, I get it with you. I mean, this is a happy time. This is supposed to be a time we celebrate. And I can only figure that the reason they did some of that was to show how these kids have overcome and rised up from some very difficult backgrounds. But I agree with you. I would have been a little bit less inclined to go that deep into someone's personal story on their probably one of the happiest days of their lives. So I understand that for sure, and I agree with you. I certainly am happy to see 7 Florida Gators QB. Being a Rams fan, I love seeing Van Jefferson go there. I think he's going to do so many big things under Sean McVay's offense. I was happy, and then on the flip side, in the 7th round, I was happy for Tyree Cleveland. 7th round to Denver is not a bad deal when they've got 3 wide receivers now that they drafted, and you've got Drew Lock. And I think it's really obvious what Elway wants to do there, and I think Tyree's going to benefit from that. And I was happy for P. Ryan and Zuniga to go to the same place. Maybe that'll make their transition easier in that they get, they know somebody at least when they get there. But I'm happy for Jabari because of the injuries he had to go through and persevere through in a season that he wasn't really even think of playing, but did so because his mom wanted. We all know that story. And then CJ, of course, in Jacksonville, good for him. He's going to step right in and play, replacing Ramsey and Bowie there in the corner position. And being a high pick like that, number 9, CJ is going to come into a pretty nice sum of money, I would think. And then, of course, we end up with Grenard and Swain, and Grenard's going to do well in Houston as well. So I was happy to see these Gators, man. I thought they did well.
Yeah, we had 7 players drafted. Your school only had 9 drafted, I believe.
Yeah.
So it's amazing when you look at how many people LSU had drafted. 14 is a lot, but it goes to show you there were some very questionable picks in this draft. I'm not sure what the Green Bay Packers were thinking. I think Jordan Love is a guy that has a chance to play in the NFL for a long time. He's very, very talented, but Aaron Rodgers, he's up there in age, but weren't they like 13-3 going to the playoffs last year?
They were.
They needed some skill on the outside to help him, and I'm just not sure about the Packers draft.
I agree with you. That was a disappointing. If I was a Packer fan, I wouldn't quite understand their logic behind all of that. Maybe Aaron Rodgers, 2 years to go. I don't know. Maybe he's got more, maybe he's got less. I'm not sure what the story is there. Maybe something behind the scenes that we don't know. One thing I did notice I really think it's amazing how well the Steelers and the Ravens always seem to draft. I thought they did very well. I thought the Rams did well. I think I like what the Dolphins did because they had so many picks, QB, but I was just with Jackson and like Jacksonville, I was thinking they would really focus on offense, but Jacksonville's a team that's got some great players coming in there, but I was really, really thinking they would be a little bit more offensive oriented to help Gardner Minshew out. Every week we see the Jags play on the board in Vegas. They are one of the lowest totals on that board. They just don't score points. Every week they play low scoring games. And I thought maybe they would be a little bit more offensive oriented, but they had some holes to fill on defense, and I understand why they did what they did. Did you like? Who other than some of the teams that I mentioned, who do you think drafted well on that? Who really helped them? So other than those 3.
I'd have to. I don't have it in front of me, but one thing I thought the Raiders. They picked 3 SEC wide receivers. I want to say Ruggs. Drafted Ruggs.
Yeah, Ruggs was their first pick. Yeah.
They had Ruggs, Edwards from South Carolina, who's a big, long, speedy type guy. And then they got my favorite player in the draft, Lynn Bowden Jr.
Yeah. Now, Mayock and Gruden have picked 14 players in the last 2 years, and 6 have come from the SEC, and 4 have come from Clemson. So, and then, of course, the fellow you play. I'll tell you another steal that I believed was there in the 2nd round, who I thought would go in the 1st, were 2 players. One was T. Higgins, who went very early in the 2nd round, and then J.K. Dobbins. I thought he would go a little higher. Maybe he had some problems holding on to the football last year, but I wasn't aware of that. I just knew that he was in the end zone just about every weekend Ohio State played multiple times. And then T. Higgins, were you surprised he went in the 2nd round, or did you think it really that it doesn't really matter?
Well, the experts said that this was probably the deepest wide receiver draft
Correct.
in
No doubt.
probably history. So you could get, even in the third and fourth round, you could get guys with a first round grade. So yeah, I mean, T. Higgins had great production at Clemson, and I like what the Bengals have done. They have some really good weapons on offense now. We just got to see if they can put it all together. And I
Right.
guess the big story, so to speak, which I said all last year when I was doing the show with Steve during football season on WRUF. Uh, you know, everybody was enamored with Jake Fromm. I've never been because
Right. Right.
and it does not surprise me one bit where he went. Now, I do think he's a smart guy. He's a guy that, like myself, could last in the league for a long time because he's not going to ruffle any
Yeah.
feathers. He's going to be a good teammate. But he was very pedestrian like, in my opinion, playing quarterback at Georgia. And maybe a lot of that has to do with their system. But, he went to a place where, honestly, it's not a good place to go if you're not a big, strong type quarterback. I was there 2 years, and it's miserable playing in that weather
Yeah.
in Buffalo. But that was the big story. It seemed like all weekend long with the draft was about how Jake Fromm dropped so far. But I wasn't surprised one bit.
Well, no, you did. I mean, you were very you were very prophetic about what would happen with him, and perhaps he should have stayed one more year at Georgia. I think we saw a drop off from the year he took them to the national title game to last year, primarily being the reason of the fact that he lost so many guys on the outside. They didn't have as many experienced wide receivers. I mean, it's hard to replace guys like Ridley, and it's hard to replace good players with freshmen who just come into a system. But be that as it may, he is in Buffalo now. He will do what he's asked to do, and like you, he will probably last quite a long time in the NFL. And to maybe even more surprising to me was that Jacob Eason, in spite of the fact that he only had 1 year at Washington, and he really didn't play very long, 10 games at Georgia, I think, and then he had to sit out a year in between, was drafted in the fourth round. But I thought the Colts did a great job getting him. I mean, that means Jacoby Brissett, as we have said on this show before, could be looking back at New England now and end up there. But I think Jacob Eason at Indianapolis, learning under Frank Reich and having the skill players that they will have there at Indianapolis for him, I got to believe that's going to be a good pick down the road when we look back at this draft as somebody who may have gone later that we thought would go higher.
Well, yeah, I mean, he you didn't have a whole lot of tape on him, but from a physical standpoint, 6'5", 6'6", has a tremendous arm. He's a guy that, as you mentioned, under Frank Wright, can sit back and watch Phillip Rivers for a year or two. No, I think he's got a chance to be a pro for a long time.
No doubt. Absolutely. And as far as these Gators go, I'm excited for every one of them. I think is going to have a chance to make that roster and play hard and play well. Obviously, Van Jefferson is I'm so happy for that kid, and I really am excited for my Rams. And everybody gets on my Rams logo. It's not that bad, is it? I mean, do you guys really hate it that much, the Rams logo? I think the jerseys are going to come out, and you're going to be really happy for what Van Jefferson is going to be dressed up in. I'm happy for Van Jefferson. That was the highlight of the draft for me. And P. Ryan's going to do well in New York too, I think, because they're going to find a way. The Gates is going to find a way to get him the ball quite a bit if he can stay healthy. So this is going to be fun to watch. And you're right, this is a very deep draft, and it was fun to watch, man. I mean, you hit it on the head when you saw the aspect of virtual drafting now and showing us what families are going through and doing, whether they're disappointed or excited. I just thought the whole production and give Roger Goodell a thumbs up. He took leadership in this very uncertain time. He went with it, and it absolutely worked. And I was pleased to be able to watch it. Felt good watching it. That's all I can tell you.
Yeah, I loved it. Like I said, I don't really watch the draft ever. Maybe the first couple of picks, but
you might now.
It's a shame they probably won't do it this way anymore, just because from a money standpoint, they can probably make too much money at the sites that they have this draft. But I thought it was great, not only just seeing the prospects being picked with their families, but I liked seeing the head coaches, the general managers with their family members and kids and stuff too.
Oh, it's great, man. Andy Reid with the Tommy Bahama shirt. I mean, it was just, you know, that our boy out in Arizona, Kingsbury, with the sectional sofa out there looking great. Then you've got the Cincinnati Bengals coach looking like he's in an interrogation room. I thought it was very insightful, and it was certainly a great production. It's something we needed, QB, because, man, these last 2 months have just been the worst as far as watching sport. Well, there's not been any sport, so yeah.
Yeah, we got a couple of Facebook Live comments here brought to you by Pound Hurt, your preferred business interruption attorneys. Tim says, I'm very happy with the Broncos picks. And Kelly says, so happy for Jefferson. He will be missed next season. Yes, he will.
Oh, no doubt. Absolutely. Yeah. And he's going to love that offense. I mean, I think, you be able to, you're qualified to speak to this much more than I am, but I would think he's really going to shine in Sean McVay's system, and hopefully Goff will be able to distribute that ball with he and some of those Robert Woods and Cooper Kupp, and there's another one, another guy, but Jefferson will be highlighted in that offense. I think it's going to be fantastic. He's in the new stadium if they when they get to play, and gosh, I can't wait to see it.
Yep. Well, JC, appreciate you joining us. We're going to turn the program. We're going to take a break, turn it over to Jackie Spreads, who's got his granddad, Billy Donovan Sr. They're going to have a tremendous interview for everybody. But stay safe, man, and we'll talk to you soon, buddy.
You got it. Thanks, QB. All right.
That's John Cornell, better known as JC. We're going to take our first time out here on the program. You're watching and listening to Pot Up with Matthews in the Morning from the Crime Prevention Security System Studios. When we come back, Billy Donovan Sr. will join Jackie Spreads. We'll be right back.
Time out! Time out! Hey! Time out! Time out! Time out! There we go. Good.
We want to take this moment to thank all our sponsors who keep the show going and pay the bills.
Let's give them something to cheer for now.
Our Gridiron sponsors are Crime Prevention Security, small enough to serve you, large enough to care. Titan MRI, Gainesville's only locally owned and operated MRI facility. Peachland Dentistry, Gator Nation's #1 choice for dentistry in Port Charlotte and surrounding areas. Area Rug Masters, your #1 choice for rug cleaning. And Pound Hurt, preferred personal injury attorneys.
Our touchdown sponsors are Gator BTW, Campus USA Credit Union, Celebration Point Town Center, Tropical Smoothie Cafe, The Keys Grill and Piano Bar, UF Mover Guys, The Digital Mortgage Guy, Adams Ribs, Cloud9 Spa, Cold Stone Creamery, Gator Dominoes, Celebrate Primary Care, Center State Bank.
If you are interested in promoting your business on the show, you can visit our website, potupwithshane.com, and click on the advertise button or call Freddie Wiebe at 352-284-3733.
Again, thank you for all the great businesses that support the show. Please remember, if you like what we are doing here, thank our sponsors and support the businesses that support us.
He's looking, still looking. He's going for the end zone. He's got a touchdown.
Definitely would have helped him change the game as to this day, the man is a bomber. He can put up shots and he can still make shots. So back then, if they had the 3-point line, I think we would have been looking at over 1,500 for sure. I can't wait for this interview. We welcome him on now. Coach, how's it going?
Jackie, doing good. How you doing?
We are doing good here, Coach. We are ready to roll this morning. We got a lot of questions for you here. Obviously, an extensive history of basketball from your background, from your perspective. I got to start with this, though. From those 06, 07 title teams, I'm being close to them and close to you and close to Billy. I know that you had a special relationship with those guys, those players, especially Joakim Noah. Can you talk a little bit about how you've been able to connect with Coach Donovan's players when he was at Florida?
Yeah, Jackie, I used to be able, thank God, I was able to take the charter plane with the team all the time. And I wound up a lot of times sitting toward the back of the plane. And these guys had one seat to themselves, like three across, so they could lay down. And we used to kind of joke in the back of the plane, the three of us, and had a lot of laughs between Joe, Kim, and Corey, and Al, and even Torian. So there was a lot of laughs. These guys, a lot of fun, and especially Joe Kim, he could make you laugh. So it was great each plane ride, sitting and spending some time with them, and especially after a big win, it was even more fun.
Right, and there were a lot of big wins during that tenure, obviously. You mentioned that you were able to travel with the team a lot, and you were fortunate enough to be on the plane and have a connection with those guys. You've probably been to every SEC school over 5 or 6 times now. Coach Donovan was there 19 years. I know that you attended games whenever you could. I mean, obviously in life, there are times when you can't go, but you went a whole lot. Out of all the SEC schools you visited, which one would you say was the toughest to play at for a Florida team?
Yeah, no doubt about it, Jack. It was Kentucky. That fan base and the games there were just unbelievable. I mean, as soon as you walked onto the court, you could hear the buzz. I mean, it was unbelievable. And that to me was the toughest venue of the whole bunch. I mean, there were other ones too. Tennessee was pretty tough, but Kentucky to me was by far the toughest.
Right, and you and I actually went to one of those Kentucky versus Florida games. I think it was the 2014 season or the 2013 season, one of the two, where Florida was very good. There was an Elite Eight and a Final Four run at the end of the year, I remember. And I remember looking up in Rupp Arena and thinking, where are the clouds? This is ridiculous. This place is phenomenal. and that being said, Rupp Arena is obviously hard to play. Kentucky's obviously year in and year out the most talented team in the SEC, usually. Now, Coach Donovan, when he was at Florida, struggled with Vanderbilt a lot. I wanted to talk about this because I've never been there, and you're a great person to be able to pick your brain about this. Is why is Vanderbilt so tough to play at? Is it just the court's weird, the fan base? Kevin Stallings is obviously a great coach. What made Vanderbilt in particular harder to play at for Coach?
Yeah, of course, Jack, the benches are under the basket on both ends. So what happens is you have a very tough time relating to your players. It's fine when the offense comes down to you in the second half, but in the first half, the offense is away from you, and you have to yell or whistle or whatever you can do to get their attention. And that was the toughest thing. I mean, just getting used to that and playing with the benches just spread so far apart, not being able to really communicate with your team.
Right, and especially in college basketball, these guys are so young. And Coach Donovan talked last week a little bit about the inexperience that he saw in guys, including confidence, surface confidence, things like that. You've been around his NBA team now for the last 5 years too, not constantly, obviously, but you've been around it a little bit. Can you talk about the differences between some of these players and maybe what you saw in a Brad Beal or a Nick Kalathis at Florida, and how that relates to how far ahead these NBA guys are? Because as you know, only a 5% of college basketball players get a cup of tea in the NBA.
Yeah, Jack, when I was there, first of all, you cannot believe how competitive these guys are. I mean, they're off the charts. And I mean, they are really class A hyper type of guys. And I am telling you, when they get an open shot, Jack, it is in. And these guys work their tails off. I mean, even they have their own routines from 3 o'clock in the afternoon for a 7 or 8 o'clock game. And it's absolutely amazing, the talent level. I mean, it's just off the charts what they can do, and the shots they make. Is just unbelievable, and the shots they make and they take, and they are really off tough defenses. I mean, this is not where guys are just giving you shots, but I mean, when they're open in those corners, you watch, they'll hit 50-60% of the shots. Where in college, I mean, you watch a lot of open shots, not even go in the basket. I mean, if you got a guy that shoots in college, in high school, rather in the college, if you got a guy that shoots from the 3-point line, he makes 30-35%. I mean, that's basically what you're looking at. Where in the NBA, if they're open, it's a 50% shot for sure.
Right, and that's another thing with basketball is the three-point line has changed the game so much, and it really has revolutionized how the game is even played. I mean, Coach Donovan talked last week. One of his quotes was, if you're the best defensive team in the NBA, you're probably going to have to wrap your head around giving up over 105 points every night. Whereas in college, we see these games where the over-unders in Vegas are set at 110, and the score is 50 to 45 after the game is over, and it's just Virginia comes to mind. It's just a grueling, really process, whereas in the NBA, I feel like not only is it faster and there's more talent, but there's more shots to be taken and shots to be made. Obviously, there's more advanced statistics and more analytics that go into the preparation. From your perspective, how have you seen Coach Donovan differ in preparation from college to the NBA before a game, if at all?
Jack, I think they prepare and do a lot of film work ahead of time. The day of or the day even before, they look at a lot of film, and that's the biggest thing in the NBA is film. I mean, they look at a ton of film because, they're playing so many games. And so the preparation is there from the film work standpoint. And that's, I think, is mainly the big difference. But he prepares pretty close both ways about the same. I mean, he may watch a lot more film in the NBA.
Right, and he's actually built a pretty good coaching tree here. We've seen guys like Chaka Smart and obviously Anthony Grant, who had a phenomenal year. Mo Cheeks was an assistant for him, who has been a head coach before. Patino at Minnesota, rather. I mean, the preparation that goes into it, obviously he had to have taught these guys something. What do you think it is that differs from him to be so successful, even though his team might not be as talented? As we saw this year, the Vegas benchmark was 32.5. He had 40 wins on March 11th. What do you think goes into him being able to get these guys ready to play and get his coaches and his coaching staff all kind of on the same page?
Yeah, sometimes that's the hardest thing, Jack, with all of this is to get guys to believe. And I think if you can get a guy like Chris Paul, who is probably one of the best leaders in the NBA, if not the best, once you get someone like him to buy in, he will keep the team in line for the rest of them to buy in. Now, don't get me wrong. There are arguments and there are, I don't like this play or we should run this and all that stuff. But basically, it's if you can get the guy that's the best player on your team to buy in, or the two best players, your job is a lot easier.
Right, and there's obviously something to be said about leadership, and from a point guard standpoint especially. You were a three-year captain there and starter at Boston College. What kind of went into prepping your teammates as well as the coaches prepping them, and how did you work with them as a captain? And how does that differ from college to what you've seen with Chris Paul or Paul George last year in the NBA?
Yeah, Jack, mainly with our college team, I was a two guard, and the thing that was in when we played, you could never scout a team because you didn't have the money. I mean, back in those days, I mean, the early '60s, I mean, college was basketball. Or a few teams that were good in New England, but you couldn't scout. You couldn't do any of that. So basically, it was more on getting guys to just play hard, and we knew who the players were in the other team, and we knew who the high scorer was, and we knew that kind of stuff. But basically, that was it. Now, I'll give you a funny story. We played the University of Detroit. Now, Detroit had Dave DeBusschere and Charlie North, and both of them were just coming in and playing as sophomores. And Boston College had played them the year before, and the two guards were the best players on the team. So when we went in to play Detroit, we put our two best defensive players on the two guards, and our two worst defensive players on the guys that we had not seen, like DeBusschere and this guy, Charlie North. And I am telling you, these two guys went off. I mean, it was unbelievable. We only lost by like 4 or 6 points. They were ranked number 6 in the country. But boy, oh boy, that's the difference in the scouting part of it and getting ready to play.
Right, and obviously it's so different from that, not only the three-point line and all the statistics and scouting film that we have available now. It's different in the sense of these guys are so much younger and so much more talented now. I don't know if that's just from a training standpoint or an era standpoint. But that being said, these guys are able to go in as freshmen, especially Kentucky comes to mind, and you weren't even allowed to play as a freshman back then. So a lot of these guys, like I knew who Anthony Edwards was 2 years ago. I knew who Zion Williams was 5 years ago. And you're not even allowed to play as a freshman going back then. The game has just changed so much, and the scouting is a big part of that. I wanted to talk about a little bit today is Coach Donovan's career at Florida at the beginning of it. When he first took that Florida job in 1996, coming from Marshall, what were your original thoughts, if you could even remember, about him taking the Florida job and moving down here to Gainesville?
Well, Jack was all for it. I mean, when he was at Marshall to get this kind of a job, I think there was a little bit more skepticism from Coach Pitino, his mentor, so to speak, and some other people who thought it was kind of like a dead end job. It was an old football school, and Steve Spurrier had it really going here, and there really wasn't much basketball. Lon Kruger did a good job, but it was hard. I mean, to have some consistency. So I think what happened was, I think that Coach Pitino and Jeremy had a talk about giving Billy enough time to get his own players in. In other words, a lot of times you look at, 2 years, 3 years, and things aren't going well, and all of a sudden, now you're calling for the guy's job. But I think Coach Pitino felt very comfortable with Jeremy that he would give him every opportunity to get his players in and develop them, and then see what happens.
Right, and as we saw, I mean, history proves that statement right. Is in his fifth year, the first year when you typically have all your players, he made a Final Four run, and then year after that, the 04 team, 05 team comes to mind. David Lee's last year, they lost to Villanova in the tournament that year. But every single year going in, once he got his own players, it seems like he was a tournament team, and even if he wasn't, he was a very competitive NIT team. Every year going into March, there had to have been some kind of strain on him that you could see. Obviously, you guys spent a ton of time together. How did he differ from maybe a game in November against Long Beach State to a game in March against another mid-major in the tournament like a Vermont or a Utah State?
Jack, I am telling you, it's unbelievable with him. He was the same playing a Division III school, if I can say, and playing Kentucky. I mean, he was the same way, the same preparation, the same nervousness, before the game, how good these guys are. And Jack, on each one of these teams that even you play that are mid-major or below, they always have one or two good players, and he was always petrified of those guys going off and getting, 25 or 30. So he would not change, Jack, his coaching style one bit, worried the same way and prepared the same way.
Right, and there's something to be said about the consistency that's there, and consistency is synonymous with Coach Donovan's career at Florida. Again, I mean, unbelievable winning percentage, unbelievable amount of Final Four runs, Elite Eight runs here and there, and it speaks to how hard it is to get to the Final Four and how hard it is to win in college basketball and win in a big way, win a ring, win a championship, even win an SEC championship. That being said, if you have 8 Elite Eight runs and no Final Four runs, there's something to be said about, okay, if you're 0-8 in the Elite Eight, maybe there's a time for a change, but there's got to be a level to it where you're at a program like Florida, and before Billy got there, Florida was one Final Four run in '94, perennial NIT team, kind of an SEC. South Carolina now is a good comparison to where I think Florida was at before Billy. Just talk about how he was able to transform that program so quick, and how he was able to get guys like Mike Miller, who was a top recruit, or like David Lee, who was a top recruit, to really buy into the Florida Gator system, even though Kentucky was the real big dog of the SEC, dating all the way back to the Pat Riley era.
Yeah. Jack, the biggest thing is in order to get the Mike Miller and David Lee and those kind of guys, you've got to have some program that you have developed a little bit. And so I give Frank Martin, who is now at South Carolina, the head coach, a ton of credit. He was coaching down in Miami High, and Anthony Grant had a great relationship. And he's the one that helped us get Brent Wright and Udonis Haslem. And they were the kind of the building blocks, so to speak, to get the thing off the ground. And then once you get 4, 5, 6 years of being on TV a lot, playing in big games, you kind of can go out and get these other guys. Up until that point, it's probably best bet when you first start to get the Florida guys as much as you can. And then after that, building a program after 4 or 5 years, then you can go out and start to national recruit a little bit more. Even though they tried it early, I think they kind of knew that we better stick with where we are and the got people we know, and get those players first, get them in, and build from a local perspective, and then go out and get the national guys. And that's pretty much what he did.
Right, and it's really tough. I mean, I guess he was very fortunate to be in Florida. We're a great pipeline state here, definitely a top 3 state for basketball recruiting. And it speaks to how he was able to get a guy like Udonis Haslem to buy in. And I just read Udonis Haslem's article in the Players Tribune last weekend. And, he's from day one, he's been somebody who really understands not only the game, but life. And I think that speaks a lot to the kind of guys that Coach Donovan recruited. I mean, looking back at his tenure, a 19-year tenure, and there's only a handful of issues and suspensions and things like that I can think of, whereas in basketball now that's commonplace, especially in college. A Georgia draft prospect, I forget his name, just got charged with murder. So a lot of these guys could be a character flaw. It seems like Billy was very fortunate with the kind of character guys he had.
Yeah, Jack, I think the two things it's hard to judge when you're recruiting, as you know, is the guy, is he a basketball junkie? Is he going to go in the gym after he has a bad game and work on his shot or whatever, a foul shooting or whatever? And the other thing is it's tough to, when you're recruiting, the other tough thing is heart. Does a guy really have a good ticker, so to speak, when things aren't going well? Is he able to perform and so on and so forth? And that's the toughest part to judge. And that's where you, Jack, have to rely on relationships. When you speak to a coach and now you have an honest relationship with him and a good relationship, he'll whisper to you and say, this guy's trouble. He's got this wrong and that wrong. Mm-hmm. So you can eliminate a lot of guys early. And that's what Billy built over a period of time with these guys, where he knew the guys to stay away from, and then the guys that he could recruit that were good people and good players.
Right, and there's something to be said about connections. They obviously run very deep in this family. And in basketball in general, everybody is so connected now, and not only because of the internet, but because of how well they scout each other. Everybody knows each other's teams so well, and especially in the SEC or even in the Western Conference in the NBA, you play these teams so many times over a certain period that you get so familiar with them. Do you think that familiarity has anything to do with the talent level being a little bit disputed, whereas Russell Westbrook and De'Aaron Fox have played each other probably 8 or 9 times now? I think De'Aaron Fox is a lot less afraid of Russell Westbrook than he was a year and a half ago. Do you think that it kind of speaks to how athletic these guys are, to where maybe the best guy on the team and the 8th best guy as a team is not as far of a drop-off as we once thought?
Oh yeah, Jack. I mean, the teams really in the NBA that go far, you always watch, you have great depth. I mean, that's the first thing you got to develop. Now, a lot of these teams that I would say in the mid tier or lower tier, that's the biggest issue. They generally can put out a pretty competitive starting 5, but when you go to the bench, that's where the big issue comes, and you have to have that bench. If you don't have it, forget it. Because as you know, Jack, when the playoffs come, I mean, defense is just off the charts because of familiarity. And you're playing to someone, let's say 7 games possibly. So the bench is the key, I always feel, to the teams that really go far in the playoffs.
Right, and you look at that history behind that statement is totally backed up. The 2011 Mavericks come to mind. They had a great deep bench with J.J. Barea and Peja Stojakovic coming off the bench. Jason Terry was 6th man of the year that year, and that really speaks to how they were able to not only go and win a title, but it was 6 games, sweep, 5 games, 6 games. They never saw a 7-game series. They were always able to outlast their opponent, and there's something to be said about that is the bench depth. If you have guys, and I talked to Billy about this last week, is nobody on his team right now when the season ended was averaging over 19 points. There was 2 guys averaging 19 points. Nobody was in the 20s. Nobody is in the 20s. Right. And there really is something to be said about how basketball can be played as a team game, and that's the way that it should be played. Whereas you got guys like Russell Westbrook comes to mind, and James Harden also comes to mind. It's weird they're on the same team that just dominate possessions, and their shots per 100 possession are in the 40s and 30s, and it's just absolutely ridiculous. Talk about how in college that hero ball seems to kind of not even be a thing. We saw Zion Williamson's probably the best college player I've ever seen. And he wasn't even, I thought he should shoot more. I thought he was too unselfish. Whereas in the NBA, these guys, I feel like I'm begging my TV for these guys to pass every night.
Yeah. Yeah. Jack, even in college, and if you look at all of the playoffs in the college NCAA tournament, I mean, the hero ball is the guys that seem to score like 30 or 35. Those teams never seem to win. I mean, if you look at, even all the North Carolina teams and stuff, going back a ways, with Dean Smith, I don't think they ever had a score that averaged 115. They said the biggest thing to keep guys from scoring 20 was Dean Smith. He just kind of had such a great rotation, and guys always passed and everything else, and it kind of filtered down. So the best teams in the NCAA tournament, as you say, Jack, are the teams that move the ball and share it and get everybody shots. because I always find when people are taking 35 and 40 shots, first of all, what does it do to the other guys, the other 3 guys or 2 guys, 4 guys in the team? You know what I mean? They're standing around wondering when the heck are they going to get the ball? And what winds up happening, they just start being spectators. So the best teams always are the teams that move the ball.
Right, and that's another thing is where you talk about the character and the heart of these guys is if you're not getting a lot of shots because you're not the best offensive player on the team, or maybe you're a Serge Ibaka where you're a rebounding and block shot specialist, and you're not getting the ball a lot, you're not really involved in the offense, especially when Russell Westbrook was on that Thunder team, speaks a lot to the heart about these guys being able to, are they going to give up and sag their shoulders and demand a trade? Or are they gonna say, whatever, whenever Russell misses, that ball is mine. You know what I mean? And kind of really have this drive behind them. And that's different in the NBA and college, obviously. Who do you think had the biggest motor at Florida or in OKC during this tenure?
Well, OKC certainly the motor was really. I mean, you could no one can compare anybody to Westbrook. I mean, he just was off the charts. I mean, beyond belief. As far as Florida goes, probably the quicker guards that he had. Jack always had pretty good motors, and a guy like Corey Brewer, I thought had a great motor, So those kind of guys come to mind. But Westbrook is no one even like him. I mean, he's in another world. Right,
and when we can't stress enough the difference in talent level between these guys. And I mean, we saw Russell Westbrook in the 07 Final Four at UCLA, and I got to tell you, I don't remember seeing him and being blown away by his athleticism and speed like I am today. And guys like Kevin Durant and Blake Griffin and even Michael Beasley, when they were in college, they didn't win championships. Adam Morrison at Gonzaga comes to mind. They were able to be probably the Naismith Player of the Year, top draft pick, led their team to great records and into the tournament. But we see that grind get to them at the end of the season, and that's just in college in March. When you're in the NBA and you're playing these 82 games, I mean, there's load management and there's the rest versus rust argument, and there are teams who aren't as competitive all year. There's obviously the tanking issue, and teams that are just perennially bad every year. How do you think that in the NBA you can stop yourself from a 5-game or to 10-game slide when you're just seeing so much talent on the floor every single night?
Yeah, it's hard, Jack. That's the thing that's really, really hard, and I always find that's when you tell the true temperament of the players. When you go into a 5, 7, 8, 10-game losing streak, it is so hard to pull yourself out. I can remember the Brooklyn Nets last year played OKC, and they had like a 6 or 7-game losing streak, and the game came down to like the final, 5 seconds, and they had a inbounds play that the guy was able to Spencer Dinwiddie got a technical. We got a technical foul. So if he makes the foul shot, basically the game is over. And he misses the foul shot. And OKC wins in overtime. Now you feel that the poor coach is probably saying, what do I have to do to get a game here? Mm-hmm. But that's when the players, when you have the leaders, Jack, that's when you get the guys to step up and say, this is not going to happen anymore. Mm-hmm. I mean, OKC got off this year, I think it was Jack 4-8, something like that. And, Paul just said, look, no more losing. We're going to, these close games, we're going to start winning. And, they went on like a 13-4, 15-4 run. And that's what you need. It's the players, Jack, that bring you out of these things. And they're hard. Believe me, they're hard.
Right. And there's something to be said about coaching and players. But at the end of the day, it's really up to the players. I mean, you mentioned, I'm sure Kenny Atkinson was beside himself, where OKC makes a huge mistake at the end of that game and gets the technical foul. And then, he's not their coach anymore. But Spencer Dinwiddie makes that shot and he gets a win, and OKC is in another state, whereas I can't believe we just lost to Brooklyn, as Brooklyn wasn't a very good team. And the East is obviously not as deep as the West every year, and especially last year, as you mentioned. I wanted to mention the character issue and go back, because I remember a story I read the other day was about Sam Jones on the Celtics. And Wilt Chamberlain, it comes to mind with this as well, is if their team had a great game, and they only scored 10 points, but they won by 20, they were in a horrible mood. But if they scored 50 and had 25 rebounds or 15 assists, whatever it may be, and their team lost, they wouldn't care. A guy like Terrell Owens in the NFL comes to mind as well. Talk about how in the NBA today, that seems to not be as big of a deal, whereas these guys are so competitive, it's win, win, win all the time, not me, me, me all the time.
Yeah, no, that's true, Jack. The only thing I will say, in this thing is these guys all look for statistics, or at least their agents do, so that they can get that new contract that you know.
Mm-hmm.
But basically, the winning is the most important thing. If you bring winning to the team, there are going to be a lot of teams that are going to go after you. You do the little things, as you say, Jack, and the rebounding, play tough defense. That's the main thing. Look at the guy from Florida State that's the defensive guy for Denver. I forget his name. Good player. And anyway, all he does is play defense. That's mainly what they use him for. I mean, he's a decent offensive player, but his real strength is defense. Now he's going to find a team. You know what I mean? So he doesn't worry about he's going to get 15, 18 points. As long as he can stop the other guy, someone will want him. And that's the way it is in the NBA. If you're a specialist and you can do one thing very, very good, you're going to find a job.
Right, and guys like Tyson Chandler come to mind, and Sean Livingston, and Andre Iguodala, who before the season ended was so highly sought after his debacle in Memphis. These role players seem to have such a great impact on the game, whereas in lower levels of basketball, even high school and into college, you're only playing 6 or 7 guys, or maybe even 5 guys if on a given night. I remember last year, I think it was Kansas State had to play with 3 players for a little bit there because all their guys fouled out or were injured or whatever it may be. And the depth in the NBA is where the best player in the Pac-12 is probably not going to even sniff the floor in the NBA. And that's a major conference. And there's obviously exceptions to every rule, like Damian Lillard was a mid-major, and Ben Wallace went to a Division II school. And obviously Scottie Pippen is the first prime example. You talk about how scouting these guys out of college can be really tough, but scouting them for the draft can be even tougher because there's such a big pool and there's such a low percentage of guys, whereas you get into the 30th to 41st picks, and I mean, Marc Gasol comes to mind, he was the 45th pick. There are diamonds in the rough, Draymond Green, where if you scout hard enough and you listen to the coaches, you can really find those needles in the haystack. Talk about how when and Coach Donovan talked about the 2014 team, nobody got drafted. Talk about how when you're looking at a college game from your perspective at the end of the bench at Florida, saying, "Holy cow, this guy's got it," or maybe, "Oh, this guy has potential." What do you look for in a college player for his NBA potential?
Yeah, Jack. I think it goes back to specialty. They look for a guy that maybe plays in one of the top 5 conferences, and you find out he averages 19 rebounds a game or 17 rebounds a game. Or you look at this guy Thibault, who played, I forget we played Washington, and he's with plays with the Philadelphia 76ers, and he's just a great defensive player. I think if you talk to everybody in the NBA, as I get around sometimes to listen to these guys, they'll always tell you that to build a team, you almost have to be in the lottery. I mean, those first 10, 12 picks are fairly well defined. You can look at guys like Zion and R.J. Barrett and this guy Jay Morant. You can look at these guys and say, look, they are really good. They'll fit anywhere. They're terrific in college, but they'll be just as good in the pros. After that, Jack, is when it comes into the specialties. That's when you look at guys that say, hey, look, this guy's got a great 3-point. He's a great 3-point shooter, like that guy Duncan Robinson from the Heat.
Mm-hmm.
And you pick these guys out, and that's what it is. If you don't have a specialty, if you're in that lower tier, it's hard.
And I've always wanted to ask you, or somebody who's been around the game to your extent, this is how much does a coach influence an NBA general manager or owner? Because I remember Tom Izzo told a story where, and Steve Kerr actually told this story on a similar podcast to this one, was that he was getting calls from Tom Izzo, or he heard that the owners, he wasn't there yet, the owners were getting calls from Tom Izzo like, why hasn't nobody taken Draymond Green? You have to take this guy. You have to take Draymond Green.
Yeah.
And is there ever a time where I think Dorian Finney-Smith is the first one that comes to my mind, where you remember Billy watching the draft or after the draft being like, I cannot believe Dorian Finney-Smith didn't get drafted. I cannot believe Nick Kalathis went undrafted. Is there ever a time that comes to mind where that player is, holy cow, I watched this guy for 4 years at Florida. He was phenomenal. How did he go undrafted?
Yeah, no, Jackie, that's the hardest part. I mean, is doing that and picking them out. Now, Billy, I think in the first 2 or 3 years, Jack, of the NBA, he recruited a lot of those college guys. You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
So he knew whatever when he was going into the meetings in the draft. But each one of these NBA teams, Jack, have got supposedly specialists. You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
In the draft. Now, Billy and some of the college coaches may call up Billy and say, look, you got to draft this guy. But Billy will go to the GM and the scouts, and they'll all sit down together and say whatever. Now, Billy knows in college, guys he would love to take. I mean, a lot of guys from Florida, but if you look at it, it's Jack. It's so hard when you look at supposedly the NBA scouting guys that are supposed to be out on the road all the time. They're the ones that are supposed to have the the beat on this stuff. And the college coach, like Billy, may know the guy and say, hey, look, this guy's a good character guy. I know him. I recruited him. I know his family. They'll listen to that. But it's hard. It's hard to, to pick a guy. Like, I knew that when the OKC needed a player, a good defensive player and a guy that had a good motor, they had Corey Brewer.
Mm-hmm.
They got Corey Brewer in that situation. And Billy knew that, he was a good kid, would play hard in the whole bit. But Jack, it is so hard. A lot of it is a crapshoot. It really is. Now, unless a guy like Izzo or Coach K or even a guy in mid-major that says, "Look, this guy's phenomenal." It's hard to get these diamond in the roughs. It really is. There's so few of them,
Right, and in mid majors, even it's harder to find because usually if a guy has NBA talent in a mid major, it stands out. It very much stands out, and that's something to be said about Ja Morant. Even is the most recent example. Whereas Murray State was such a popular upset pick going into the tournament. Obviously, they did win one game and then get blown out by a good Florida State team there. The consistency in these guys being drafted, though, is what I want to talk about. I mean, Anthony Bennett is the first overall pick comes to mind. And usually going into a draft, 99% of the time, this guy's going to be the number one pick. Pretty much every year. That year Anthony Bennett was taken, or the year Greg Oden versus Kevin Durant, or even the year Greg Oden was picked first and Kevin Durant was the speculation there. Talk about how in the draft these guys can end up being busts and what you see going into the draft that thinks, ooh, maybe this guy isn't as sure a bet as we once thought.
Yeah, Jack, again, I tell you, some of these things are so hard. It's even like football draft, you kind of just you're just hoping and praying and for luck. I mean, generally, as I say, the top 5 picks, usually you should be able to get someone that lasts. And most of the time, I think that happens, where you do get a guy that stays in the league for quite a while. But it's so hard. I don't know. I mean, Anthony Bennett was one, the kid that we had here at Florida, and the Wizards took him number 1. Michael Jordan took him. I can't think of his name, but anyway, these things happen. I mean, it's hard. You look at these guys and you say, look, we need a big guy that can shoot, or we need a guard that can do this or that. That's what we need really to get our team well-rounded. And then you draft them and you say, boy, we made a mistake. Or, Jack, you may get a guy in like Serge Ibaka and say, boy, This guy's a shot blocker. I mean, 20-something pick in the draft, and boy, oh boy. So Jack, I find that again, it's a crapshoot. I mean, Zion Williamson, Jay Morant, and Barrett, and these guys, they weren't, no issues at all picking those guys.
Right. And another one that comes to mind here is before we finish up is Hasheem Thabeet out of UConn. And I heard a story from an NBA general manager was that he asked him, the owners asked him, I think it was the Washington Wizards, the owners asked him, what do you think? They asked Jim Calhoun, what do you think of Hasheem Thabeet? And he said, well, he's tall, but his footwork isn't great, and his hands aren't great, and his reaction time isn't great, but he's very tall. And when a college coach is saying that about their former player, it's probably time to not touch that guy with a 10-foot pole. Is there ever a time at Florida or as just a basketball fan where you've been going into a draft saying, I watched this guy in college and he was not as good as everybody thinks? And usually when those eye tests come about, the Hasheem Thabeet comes to mind, is we're usually right as basketball junkies. You and I have a pretty good eye for the game. Talk about how when a bust is picked and a lot of people think about it. I mean, there's huge controversy when Anthony Bennett was picked. And there's obviously better guys in the draft. What going into the draft do you think would inspire these GMs, or how much power do college coaches have to get their guys drafted?
Yeah, I mean, I do think, Jack, I think in the first 10 or 12 picks or whatever I just said, I keep saying it, but I don't think it's too much influence, I mean, to a degree, unless there's some little bit of doubt that they have about a guy's motor or his heart. But other than that, I think that the coaches, if someone said, well, look, don't take Zion, take so-and-so. I mean, that's not going to happen. But if you get into the later rounds in the first round, later picks in the first round, yeah, I think the coaches can have an influence. There's no doubt about it.
Right.
If someone comes up and says almost, look, as you said, Jack, the footwork, I go back. it's funny. Just go back to what you were saying is, having a heart and motor. Udonis told me the story one time when I was with him about the Miami Heat. He was kind of like, I think he had to play overseas for a year or two, maybe 3. And he told me that he was with a group of the Heat players that were trying out, and they needed really like an 11th and 12th man, or 13th and 14th, whatever it was. And he said that there was a play where the ball kind of bounced off the rim as they were scrimmaging and rolled to the other end of the court. And he was the only one who ran and got the ball and brought it back. And Riley noticed that. And he said, Udonis said, all those guys were fairly equal that I was trying out against. But because I did that and Riley saw what the kind of hustle I had and everything else, he said that helped him influence me getting picked by the Heat.
Right, and that's a very lucky story there. Pat Riley, obviously a legend of the game, one of the smartest men in basketball history. Unfortunately, that is all the time we have, though, today. Grandpa, Coach Donovan Sr., we thank you so much for joining us. We're going to have you on soon here. I told Billy last week we're going to make this a recurring guest thing. So maybe in a few months here, hopefully there will be basketball to speak of, and we could really go in depth about some NBA.
Great, Jackie. You all be well, and you're doing a great job, and thanks for having me.
Appreciate it. Anytime, Coach. Love you.
Love you too, Jackie.
Timeout! Timeout! Hey! Timeout! 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 There we go. Good.
We want to take this moment to thank all our sponsors who keep the show going and pay the bills.
Let's give them something to cheer for now.
Our Gridiron sponsors are Crime Prevention Security, small enough to serve you, large enough to care. Titan MRI, Gainesville's only locally owned and operated MRI facility. Peachland Dentistry, Gator Nation's #1 choice for dentistry in Port Charlotte and surrounding areas. Area Rug Masters, your #1 choice for rug cleaning. And Pound Hurt, preferred personal injury attorneys.
Our touchdown sponsors are Gator BTW, Campus USA Credit Union, Celebration Point Town Center, Tropical Smoothie Cafe, The Keys Grill and Piano Bar, UF Mover Guys, The Digital Mortgage Guy, Adams Ribs, Cloud9 Spa, Coldstone Creamery, Gator Dominoes, Celebrate Primary Care, Center State Bank.
If you are interested in promoting your business on the show, you can visit our website, potupwithshane.com, and click on the Advertise button or call Freddie Wiebe at 352-284-3733.
Again, thank you for all the great businesses that support the show. Please remember, if you like what we are doing here, thank our sponsors and support the businesses that support us.
He's looking, still looking. He's going for the end zone.